We've looked at how to find the characteristics of an equation, from an equation and from a graph for our sine and cosine. And then we looked at how to use that information to get the characteristics when we're given a description. So today we're going to look at how do we create an equation from our graph. So when we're creating an equation from a graph, we need our amplitude, which we already know how to find. We need the midline, and you either need the period or the b value. So the period is not in the equation, but you can get the b value, which is in the equation, by using the period. So remember, we have this formula here that the period is 2 pi divided by b. Well, if we solve that for b, notice b is down low, so we can switch O. So then b is the same thing as 2 pi divided by the period. Okay. So you'll want to write this equation down as well. So we can use the period to get to b value, the b value that's in the equation. Or if we have the equation, we can use the b value to get to the period by using the period is 2 pi divided by b. Okay. Now you also do need to remember your 4 different ways of your graphs. So you have a positive sine graph, starts in the middle and then goes up. So 3 middles, remember, is 1 full cycle. A negative sine starts in the middle but goes down first, again 3 middles. You have a positive cosine graph, which starts at the top and then goes to the next top for 1 full cycle. And then you have a negative cosine graph, which starts at the bottom and then goes to the next bottom for 1 full cycle. So your positive cosine looks like a happy face, your negative cosine looks like a frowny face, and then your sine has both a happy and a frowny face with it on both of them. So I like to remember that positive sine goes up first, negative sine goes down first. Okay. We also need the c value, which we call the horizontal shift. Okay, we've largely ignored this part so far. We're going to get a little bit more in depth to it on another day. But it also could be called our phase shift. Okay. And then today what we're looking at is that it's starting at 0. We'll look more when it's something other than 0 later on. Okay. There's multiple ways to write each equation. So for example, if we look at this graph, I could say that this is a positive sine graph here. But I could start my graph here and say that this is a positive cosine. I could start my graph here and say that this is a negative cosine. And I could start my graph here and say, well, this is a negative sine, right? So we could have a whole variety of ways that we write our equation, and I could shift to this other direction or shift even further this way as well. So there's an infinite amount of ways to write this. Generally, I look for the first one starting at 0, because that's generally easiest to do. But we still need the amplitude, the midline, the b value, and then is it sine, cosine, or tangent. Okay? So remember that in order to get our amplitude, that we need a max and min. So our max here is at 5, and our min here is at -1. So that means that our amplitude is going to be 5 minus a -1 cut in half, or 6 halves, which is 3. So now I know my a value. Then we can find the midline using our min and max as well. There's a plethora of ways to get there. You can do min plus max cut in half. So we can do 5 plus -1 cut in half, which gives us 4 halves, which is 2. Right? And then I'd like to do a quick check and make sure that that looks like it should be the middle. We could do the minimum, which is -1 plus the amplitude, which is 3, which gives us 2. We could also do the max, which is 5, and subtract the amplitude, which is 3, and get 2 as well. And that's our d value. So we have a and d in our equation. Remember, our equation looks like y equals a sine b x minus c plus d, and we've got these double sets of parentheses here. Or you could do the same thing with cosine. So y equals a cosine b x minus c plus d. Okay. So we have 4 letters that we're getting, and then we need to decide, is it sine or cosine, and is it positive or negative from there. So we have our A value, we have our D value. To get the B value, we see how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So if I look, here's 0, here's 2 pi. So notice I'm not even a full cycle here. If you can tell that this is a portion of it, and in this case in particular, it's a quarter of the cycle, that's great. If you can't tell that, then you should go the other way where you start, okay, well, at 0, I'm in the middle, so that means 1 period is 3 middles. So I look and see how long 3 middles is. So this would be the period. Well, if the period is 8 pi, that means that I can use b is 2 pi divided by the period to get to my b value. So this would be 2 pi divided by 8 pi. The pi's cancel, and 2/8 reduces to 1/4. So I can get the 1/4 from visually seeing that this is cut into 4 different slices equally, and that between 0 and 2 pi, only a quarter of it has happened. Or you can say the period is 2 pi, or sorry, the b value is 2 pi divided by the period, and since the period is 8 pi, that makes our b be 1/4. So now we have 3 of the 4 letters. Well, our C value is relatively simplistic for today. That's just saying that, hey, we're starting at 0. So this is our C value. So in this case, we're starting at 0. So now I have A, B, C, and D. Now I need to decide, is this a sine wave or a cosine wave? Well, because we're starting here at 0, that means we're starting in the middle. So if we start in the middle, that means it's going to be a sine wave. Since I went middle up, that's going to be a positive sign. So now I have all the pieces of the information for the equation. Now I just need to write the equation. So my equation is going to be y equals, A is the amplitude, so that's our 3 value from right here. So 3, it's a positive sign. The B value is 1/4, and then we're shifting by the C value of nothing, and then we have to add our D value, which is 2. Now, x minus 0 is really the same thing as x, so I can say this is y equals 3 sine 1/4 x plus 2, and then that's my equation.
If we look at the next one, we can start by finding the min and max, and getting the min and max allows us to find the amplitude and the midline. Now, some of you may be able to visually see the midline, and that's fine, but we still need the amplitude. So our max is at 5, the min is at -1. So that means that the amplitude is 5 minus a minus 1 cut in half. So then that gives us 6/2, which is 3. So then we can find our midline. My personal preference is to do the min plus the amplitude. So -1 plus the 3 is 2. So now we have our D value and our A value. Now the B value, remember you can count how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So at 0, we're starting in the middle. So that means I'm going to go 3 middles. So there's 1 period. Here's the second period. I'm still counting because we're not to 2 pi yet. Here's the third period, and here is the fourth period. Okay, and that stops at 2 pi. So that means that our B value is 4. Now, if you had gone the other direction and decided to look at and see, okay, well, the period stops here. Well, that's at 2 tick marks. Well, 4 tick marks is pi, so 2 tick marks is pi halves. So you could have said the period is pi halves, so then that means the B value is 2 pi divided by the period. So that would be 2 pi divided by pi halves, so we flip and multiply, so I times by 2 over pi. The pi's cancel, we do 2 times 2 on top. This is really over 1. This part got flipped, so we're ignoring that now. And then 1 times this unsaid 1 now. So then that gives us 4 over 1, which is 4. So our B value is 4, either because we took the period and did 2 pi divided by the period to get to 4, or you can see that there are 4 cycles that happen between 0 and 2 pi. Okay? So whichever way you want to get there is fine, but those are both of the ways. So now we have the amplitude, which is A, the midline, which is D, and the B value, which is how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. Now, we could, on this one, say that we're starting up top here, and that we have a horizontal shift that we've shifted over by this smidge amount here. We could say that we're starting here and have a negative cosine graph and that we've shifted over by this amount. We could say that we're starting down here and that we've shifted by this amount and have a negative cosine. I think it's equally as easy to say that we started here at 0 and then this was a positive sine graph. So because it starts in the middle and goes to the top, we know that this is a positive sine graph. And then because we are starting at 0, we know that our C is 0. So then we can plug all this information into our equation. So y equals, A is the amplitude, so that's our 3. It's a positive sign, so the positive gets tacked on with a 3, which is unsaid right there, so we're fine. The B value is 4. So 4, and then whatever variable we're choosing, we can do theta this time. And then our starting value, which is the C, so, or the opposite of the starting value is what it really is. When it's 0, it doesn't matter. And then plus our midline, which is the D, which is 2. Again, theta minus 0 can simplify to just theta. So we really only care about the C value if we're starting somewhere other than 0. And then don't forget to keep your y equals. So then this is a possible equation. Now again, there's a plethora of equations that you could write. I could start from over here called a positive cosine, but that we shifted left by that amount, right? So there's a plethora of options that you have here. Generally, people like to start at 0, so this is the one I would guess most of you would prefer to do. If we look at this one, pause the video, see if you can find the max, min, amplitude, and midline. Okay, so you should have found the max, min, amplitude, and midline. So let's see if you're correct. So our max is 1. The min is -3. So that means that the amplitude is 1 plus a negative, oh, not plus, minus. I was doing midline there. 1 minus a -3 cut in half. So we have 4 halves, which is 2. So that's our A value. The midline is going to be, we can do 1 plus the -3 cut in half, so that's -2 cut in half, which is -1. I like to do a quick double check and make sure that that looks right, that I didn't mess up any of the arithmetic on that one. And then I'm going to count how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So here's 0, here's 2 pi. You don't have to draw these lines. I'm just doing it so you can visually see a little bit easier what I'm talking about. But I'm going to start counting at 0 and then end counting at 2 pi. Because at 0, we're down at the bottom. 1 period is bottom to bottom. So this right here is 1 period. Ooh, I drew that horribly. Notice I can't tell where this is precisely because it falls in between my 2 tick marks. So if the question were what is the period, I would be forced to look at what the B value is in order to get the precise period. Okay, we're finding the equation, so I need the B value regardless. So here, this is our second cycle from bottom to bottom, and then we have a third cycle from bottom to bottom, and I'm stopping counting here because we're at 2 pi. So that means that our B value is 3. All right, so now we have A, B, and D. Again, I'm choosing to say we're starting at 0, so I'm not shifting left or right at all, so our C value is 0. So now I just need to decide what kind of graph it is. So since we're looking at starting at 0, we're starting at the bottom, so then I need to think, okay, is that sine, cosine, and then is it positive or negative? Well, the sine starts in the middle, so it's not sine, so it's cosine. Well, then the question is it positive cosine or negative cosine? Well, this looks like a frowny face, so it's a negative cosine. So now I'm going to put all of this information together for my equation. So we get y equals, A is the amplitude, which is 2. It's a no, it's not positive, it's a negative cosine, so the negative gets tacked on with the 2. Remember, amplitude is never a negative, but because it's negative here, we're tacking that negative along there. So this negative here is equating to this negative. And then our B value is 3. So then we're going to put that here. I'll do X this time. We're starting at 0, so -0. Or you could see from several times of doing it that that part doesn't matter because x minus 0 is x. And then plus our midline, which is plus a -1. So I'm going to simplify that to just be -1. So then we can really simplify this to be negative cosine 2, 3x minus 1. Again, you're welcome to pick whatever variable you want, x, t, theta. That's all fine. So let's try this last one. So here our max is at negative 3.5. The min is at negative 8.5. So that means that the amplitude is negative 3.5 minus a minus 8.5, cut in half. So that turns to plus. Remember, if you're going to put this into the calculator, that you have to put this in parentheses or use your alpha y equals to get to the correct answer, or do it in 2 steps. So if you're doing it in 1 step, you need that set of parentheses or the alpha y equals. If not, you can get the, oh, I dropped the negative, try to. There we go. So that gives us 2.5. I knew that 6 was unreasonable because it didn't look like we went from the middle 6 down and 6 up. So I looked back and saw what was wrong with my problem, and I saw I had dropped the negative. So our midline, if we really wanted to, we could just do second enter on the calculator and then just go change this plus. We need to insert a negative, so you can do second ins, which is the delete button. And then that gives us y equals -6, which is what we had before that. So the midline is y equals -6, which remember is our d value. I do a quick check and I see, yeah, that makes sense. I can also check and be like 1, 2, and a half. And check that. Remember, you can also count by the graph. So a half, 1, 2, 3, 4, and another half. So 4 plus 2 halves gives us 5, and we cut 5 in half, which gives us the amplitude, which is 2.5. We start at the bottom, go up a half, and then 1, 2, which gets us at the 6. So there's a plethora of ways you can get the information that you need. Then we need our b values. So I'm going to look at how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So notice this one is just a partial cycle. So on this one, it's not too bad to tell that it's half of a cycle because we've gone from the top to the bottom. So our b value is a half. If you struggle seeing it that way, instead you look and say, okay, well, since it's not a full cycle, I'm just going to see how long the one cycle is. So here, the period goes from top to top. I'm looking here because we're starting at the top here, ending at the top here. So this distance from there to there is 4 pi. I could count 3 middles. So this is pi. Here's a second pi. Sorry, not try again. This is pi. That's my first middle, second middle, third middle. So we went from pi to 5 pi. Well, how far is it from pi to 5 pi? Well, that's a total of 4 pi. So any way you get it, the period is 4 pi. If we had started at bottom, that would be over here. And to go to the bottom, we could look and see that's 4 pi. We don't have enough graph space over here to tell precisely when it ends. Same thing over here. We don't have a precise ending for the end of the next bottom. But you can tell the period by 3 middles, top to top, or bottom to bottom. Generally, it's easiest to go from 0 to the end number because the subtraction is really quick. So here the period is 4 pi. So that means that the b value is the same thing as 2 pi divided by the period. So then that gives us 2 pi over 4 pi. The pi's cancel, and that reduces to 1/2. Again, you can choose to get it from this graph, as long as it's not one that you can tell the nice portion or the fraction of the cycle that it's gone. Or you can get it by finding the period and then figuring out the b value using the b is 2 pi divided by the period. So now we need our c value. I'm choosing to start here at 0. All right, so that's our c value. I could also choose to start down here at 2 pi and call it a negative cosine. I could choose to start here at pi and call it a positive, that's not positive, a negative cosine. I could choose to start it back here and call it a positive cosine. Okay, I'm just struggling. A positive sine. So there's a plethora of options that we have here. I'm just going to go with starting at 0. So we have y equals, a is the amplitude, which is 2.5, or you could write it as 5/2. I'm fine with either. Cosine, since I'm starting at 0, it's a positive cosine. And then our b value is 1/2. I'm going to use theta, and then minus 0, and then plus our midline, which is -6. So I can simplify this to 2.5 cosine of 1/2 theta minus 6. Now, if, for example, I decided to look at doing, let's change colors here, look at doing the negative cosine graph right here, I could write this: the amplitude, the midline, and the period do not change. The C value changes, and then what kind of graph it is changes. So I would do y equals, this still 2.5, but this time it's a negative sine graph because we're starting in the middle and going to the bottom. So minus sine. The B value is still 1/2, but this time I'm saying, hey, we need to shift by this amount. Remember, you do the opposite sign of where it starts. So this would be theta minus pi, and then plus our midline, which is still at -6, so -6. Right? So these would be equivalent equations for that. Again, I could choose lots of them. I could choose to go from here. I could choose to start from here. I could choose to start from here. Oops, from here, and do a positive cosine there. So there's a plethora of ways that you could start. You could even start more left if you had the graph, or you could calculate how much it would be. So there's lots of graphs that happen here. Now this would be the same thing as if I distributed it through, be -2.5 sine of 1/2 theta minus pi halves minus 6. Okay. So here you can easily see where your starting point is. Here, the starting point, it has the period that's embedded in, or the period change that's embedded into it. So if you wanted to see where this started, you would have to factor out that 1/2 to get to see the fact that you're shifting right by a value of pi. Okay. Both of these are equivalent. Sometimes one is nicer than the other. Generally, this one is a little bit easier to calculate things or to see or figure out which parts go where. But this is also an acceptable one to have. So that's how you find your information, your equation from a graph. Start by figuring out what your your maximum and your minimum are. And then from your max and min, you can automatically figure out the amplitude and the midline. Use B is how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So it may be a fraction, or it may be multiple ones of them, like on these two. If you can't figure out the fraction portion, figure out what the period is instead, and use the fact that B is 2 pi divided by the period to figure out what the B value is. And then you have to remember what your sine, cosine, and not tangent, we're not doing tangent right now, your sine and cosine graphs are, and which one's positive and negative. So positive sine goes middle up, negative sine goes middle down. Positive cosine looks like a smiley face. Negative cosine looks like a frowning face. Your sine has both frowny and smiley, so I like to think of it as goes up first, goes down first, and that relates to our positive is up, negative is down.